today we are switching gears and diving into an area of motorsports that's just as intense as the battles on track, the legal side of racing. When it comes to motorsports, speed, strategy, and engineering might be what you say, but behind the scenes, contracts, regulations, and legal disputes, I mean, when we talk about FIA, you know about that, shapes the sport just as much as tire choices and pit stops. And that's where our guest comes in. John Hand is a top motorsport lawyer and legal expert, ensuring teams, drivers, and organizations stay on the right side of the rules, or at the very least, know how to navigate the gray areas, just like the teams, navigating the whole gray areas when it comes to outwash and inwash. Whether it's driver contracts, sponsorship deals, or some of the most controversial legal battles in motorsport history, John has seen it all. We'll talk about what it's really like handling the legal side of racing, the most bizarre cases he's encountered, and whether the FIA rulebook is truly as confusing as it seems. Because for me, it's bloody Greek. And of course, we'll put his quick thinking skills to the test with some absolutely wild rapid fire questions that no legal degree could prepare him. That's where I'm going to win with him. So buckle up, because this episode is about to go full throttle. Let's welcome John Hand to the Stripping the Dipping. Yay!
Thanks a lot. I mean, reaching out to a lawyer when something hasn't gone wrong, which is super rare. So it's nice to be in a scenario where I'm not trying to fix something.
So before we start deep into the legal side of your profession, I want to ask, who is John Hand without a title? Who are you?
Well, I'm just a normal lad from north of England who didn't expect to become a lawyer by any stretch of the imagination and had no reference whatsoever as to what I would end up doing. Just so happened to sort of fall into it. I like my motorsport, which is always good. I like football, and otherwise, sport's all good fun, and have lots of mates and like hanging out with them.
So, John, can you share what drew you to specialize in motorsports law and how your career path led you to this niche field? Because trust me, when I'm talking about law and sports, those two, we rarely see how that goes together unless they come at, with some sort of a bizarre cases, a scandal or disputes between teams and contracts and all that, which sometimes can happen, but sometimes actually take time to actually come out of the surface and for the public to get to know as well. So please.
Yeah, for sure. I get so many messages saying, how do I get into motorsport law? What is motorsport law? And it's sort of made up. I like to think of it as made up. It's not real law. And you go through your training and you learn all this stuff that underpins society generally. The motorsport stuff is completely tangential to that. And I think, how did I get into it? How does it start? I think it all comes back to just doing general training as a lawyer and becoming a specialist in commercial and other topics. And then from there, finding a job that looked quite cool that cropped up and thinking, oh yeah, that would be quite interesting. And with a background, as I say, of enjoying the sport and having a bit of knowledge there, taking that and saying, well, let's give it a go and see what will happen. Motorsport law itself is lots of different things. It's contracts, as you already said, it's cases, it's regulations. It's a huge, broad range of topics.
As the head of motorsports group at level, do tell us what level is all about as well. But as the head of the motorsports group at level, what are your primary responsibilities and what does a typical day look like for you?
So there isn't one, which I think is probably an answer that everybody gives you whenever you ask them in motorsport more generally, or sport as a whole, I think. But to kind of go back to the start of what level is, level's a bit of a funny model comparative. Most law firms operate on a traditional partnership structure. You join as a junior lawyer, you work your way up, you join an equity partnership at the end. Level is a decentralised group of ultra-specialist lawyers, predominantly working in sports, but also across entertainment, tech, media, other spaces. And the idea is you get access to somebody who actually knows what they're doing. And for better or for worse in the motorsport space, that's me, because I had experience of doing it before. So clients tend to reach out to me because they have something that's cropped up that's different or interesting, and they want somebody who's seen it before, who has interacted with the same players before. I already mentioned the FIA, but who has come across them, who knows what happens, who understands the field, understands the sector. And I think it squeezes out that extra 10% of value for clients, because I'm not so egotistical as to think that not every lawyer in London could write a good contract. I mean, there's plenty of decent lawyers around, plenty of decent sports lawyers around. I think it's, you could go to a football lawyer and they could do motorsports law probably to about 80%, 85% of a good job. And you might never need that last 15% because something might never go wrong. But if it does, or something happens and you need the absolute final and sort of squeezed out of it, then that's where you need a specialist. And so I wouldn't dabble in football or tennis or whatever to a really detailed extent. And the same applies to things like motorsport regulatory queries. Like, it's amazing what you can bring from knowledge of what's gone on in NASCAR or IndyCar or whatever else to something else. And use it to ensure maximum value. So my days tend to revolve around somebody calling me and saying, this weird thing has happened in motorsport versus whoever it is, and me saying, oh yeah, I saw that happen 3 times before, so this is how we can do it in a good most effective, cost efficient way for you.
So this question, we can go with a general answer, but I have to explain it and then say, because you're a special person, because everybody loves Mercedes F1 team. And during your tenure as senior legal counsel for Mercedes F1 team, you were involved in negotiating the Concord agreement. However, since these specifically are, as you mentioned, ultra confidential stuff, we don't want to, talk about that part. But still, in general, would you be able to talk about the way the legal sophistication of motorsports have developed since you started your work at Mercedes?
Yeah, for sure. So Mercedes, as you mentioned, I mean, lots of people are fans of Mercedes. I mean, they only re-entered as a team just over 10 years ago. And I think since then they've gained an absolutely massive amount of fans, not least because of one driver in particular, I'm sure everyone would agree, and because of a particularly large amount of success, which was great to be involved in. And so they're a brilliant place to work and a very, very lovely group of people. And so they're reflective of, I think, what people think they're like on TV, which is very nice, obviously. Concord, as you've already said, is a sort of secret squirrel topic. Although we've seen very recently in the US that NASCAR teams are trying to get disclosure of it, which would be very interesting for everybody. How has F1 developed since I joined? So I joined in 2019, so before COVID, before Drive to Survive, before the sport had exploded and its audience had changed as much as it has now. I think at the time I looked back and there was an interview with one of the major team principals, I think about 6 or 7 years ago, saying that they'd thought that the fan base at the time was getting older by a year every year. And they were catering effectively to middle-aged white men who were the sort of core 75% of the fan base because they could buy Rolexes, etc. Whereas since I've started, that's changed dramatically. And that, of course, massively changes the legal playing field as well. Once you add the complexities of doing things like filming for Netflix, you add financial regulations, you add the applied sciences divisions that many teams now have, you add more coherent esports offering, as we all saw happen during COVID. It just hugely ramps up the complexity, and it means, ironically, you need more people to deal with that. And the legal side, in all facets of it, right through from HR to business to finance to everything, just becomes ever so slightly more complicated. People become more legally sophisticated, and therefore they're using lawyers more because there's more money in the sport generally, and teams, drivers, whoever else are more up for having fights with other people or negotiating topics more heavily because there is just more money involved. And I think we've seen that with things like a couple of years ago there was the Piastri dispute, of course, coming out of the contract recognition boards things. There's just more of those topics cropping up on a monthly basis now, whereas when I started it was quite rare, really.
Everything is out there now, and people can be questioning every single thing. Like, I don't want to go into details, but everyone was looking, and everyone was actually watching. The whole world was watching, if I'm not wrong, when it came to the decision of 2021 Abu Dhabi,
Yeah.
the issue, and what Mercedes was going to do, and how the FIA is going to react to all that. So I'm pretty sure that it must have bloody ways, sort of. Hey, we're going crazy, like trying to limit or something like that. But when we're moving on, speaking of the FIA challenges, since I'm not going to put you in trouble, you've advised on FIA protests and appeals. What are some common regulatory challenges? How do you approach resolving them?
Yeah, of course. So, I mean, you mentioned Abu Dhabi 21, but I think that was just very busy. And I think it's quite fair to say. I mean, I think I've received more messages off mates about that one incident than anything else ever, probably more than I've received saying happy birthday or anything equivalent to that. And it's amazing how your job that you think is pretty normal that you go and do on a daily basis can suddenly become hugely relevant to people you've never really spoken to before about what it is that you do. I think we've probably all got friends that we know and they don't really know what their friends do. They work in finance or whatever else it is, but my mates knew exactly what it was I was doing, so I was getting absolutely bombarded. As far as FIA protests and appeals, it's available for everybody to see. I mean, you could Google it right now, and you could download the FIA regulations, and you could read through what goes on in a protest and an appeal, and you could at least get a very basic understanding of what happens, and you could read through decisions that have taken place and do take place at every single race, and you could educate yourself on just about what is the basics of how the FIA deals with improper scenarios in motorsport. And that means a lot of people think they know exactly how it works and think they could do it and think it'd be totally fine. I think the teams are operating in an extremely complicated regulatory environment. I mean, if you look at banks, for example, they have 10,000 pages of regulation that they have to deal with. In motorsport, when I started, we were at something like 300, 400 pages of regulation, which is still a lot and is probably too much, but it's less than you might have in a truly regulated industry. Since then, that's grown to something like 1,200, 1,300 pages in about 5-6 years. And that is only the stuff that you need to know. So that doesn't include things that also come across my desk, like the Motorsport UK regulations, so the national regulations, or the regulations of other national stakeholders, or decisions being made in their courts, which I've seen can also be useful to know too for cases that happen in F1. So you very quickly get up to thousands and thousands of pages of regulation. And so that has made the whole environment for teams much harder to operate. You've got to make sure that you're compliant with many, many more things. And your lawyers and your team have to know many more things than they did only not that long ago. So I think that complexity is something that fans probably do appreciate. I mean, it's a topic that people like to engage with. It creates drama. I think that's probably a good thing. If something's going wrong and track limits are being talked about, that's good for everybody because it's more eyeballs on the sport, I think. Could we make it clearer? I think we could. I think everybody could make regulation probably clearer. I think it's written in a way, always has been, legalese is too much. I think it's all written in a way that is, at least because it's historic, designed to be lawyerly rather than for people to understand. And that's in part intentional because it means that it trips you up more than it would do otherwise, which is unfortunate. I would love to see it all visualised so that you could just have a look at it and it would all be flowcharts or presented in different ways so that average people could pick it up and understand it. I think that would lead to less disputes. I think it would be better for everybody, and less lawyers and lawyers poring over things is probably better for everybody in the world. I think even if it does people out of a job.
Let's talk about the AI also. Do you think this is like an extra question that I just got into my mind and I'm asking out of the blood blue? So you have the right to reject it as a judge that can anything, right? But I'm just asking you. So we have this whole trend every single thing we do right now. Even the teams are using AI to for the wind tunnel, using CSV, all that. But when it comes to a lawyer, if that's the word, when it comes to motorsport law and to lawyers, can AI, can we use AI to help focus in with the lawyers in actually going through all these pages and pages and help you through these, or how does AI help you with all that, if it's a possibility?
Yeah, for sure. I think lawyering as a whole, people are going to be left behind. Lawyers will be left behind if they can't use AI in the right way. I think that's going to be true of every industry. It's not going to replace lawyers. I don't think at the moment it's going to take my job. But I think it's going to be all about teaching yourself to use it in the right way. I'm sure you see exactly the same thing. Everybody would say that's true of the same thing. Is it there now for answering really complicated regulatory questions? Absolutely not. And you will get the wrong answer. And I do get clients that call me and say, I have generated a contract in ChatGPT, is that okay? And I'm seeing that more and more, and I think lots of lawyers are probably seeing that more. And there's a bit of false economy there because it gives you something that is okay, but misses large chunks of good stuff. And so I don't think it's quite the solution to everything quite yet. How can we use it more in the motorsport, more legal space generally? You could have scenarios where people like the FIA who are drafting the regulations are asking it for alternative solutions. They are putting in drafting and they are saying to it, can you make this more plain English, or can you make this work in a more accessible manner to somebody who's never read legal regulations before, or can you make it gender neutral, or all of those sorts of things. So I think there's ways of taking information and presenting it in a slightly different format that just helps you come to the same end conclusion, and for that I think it can be quite a powerful tool. But I don't see how, at the moment at least, I could see this changing though over the next sort of 12-18 months, I don't see how right now it'll be used on a hourly basis by people to, on the legal side at least, to come out with solutions on asking it questions as you would a sort of normal legal tool, because if you don't know the topic in the background, then you will just get things wrong. And I think we've seen that. I mean, there's loads of news stories about that.
So, get back to John Story, the motorsports lawyer. What inspired you to get the motorsports lawyer part, and what goals do you take with this platform? Because it's very rare for me. So I come from Sri Lanka. I'm based in Sri Lanka,
Yeah.
right? And when to my friends who are learning law, who are coming to lawyers, when I ask about motorsports law, they just go blank. They have no idea. They just say, I don't know, we would love to study, but we have no idea how to study, where to start, and where to end with that. And I'm like, okay, these are like the areas that Sri Lanka and probably many countries like in Asia, small countries like ours, are missing. There's a huge business for that side as well that people don't know. So, back again to you. What sort of goal are you trying to achieve with this platform?
Yeah, so it's super interesting. Or might not be to some people, but I completely agree with you that there's a huge gap there. That we are not. We touched on it earlier when we were talking about the sophistication of the topic as a whole, but football has this, and rugby has this, and equivalent bigger sports. They are bigger sports. Have more people operating in that space who have been talking about it for much longer. So when something fantastical happens in the world of law in football, somebody sits down on Sky Sports or your equivalent local broadcaster and talks about it, and you learn a bit more about what is going on in that space. Motorsport has never had that, and is quite far behind in that, mostly because there's just not a lot of people working in the area. And the US has a lot more motorsport specialists. NASCAR is much more developed. The US is a more sophisticated legal system because of its framework. In terms of complexity, so there it's much more established. But in the UK and more generally globally, there's not really anybody talking about what the FIA regulations look like, or how to distill that 1,200 pages into something accessible for people. And so I have a slightly irreverent writing style, and I thought, well, I'll have a bit of a go at putting something down after some races about 12 months ago, and didn't really expect very much to happen. I got a huge amount of messages and comments back from people saying, this is quite cool actually, super curious about what you think about X or Y or Z. Then had the challenge, of course, as always, of trying to think of what I could write about and how I could write it in a way that didn't give away any confidential information. And so I very carefully constructed subsequent posts, usually about regulatory topics, because it's easier, because it's all in the public domain. And again, just kept receiving nice messages of people. So I sat down over summer last year and thought, well, what can we do? And I discussed with another lawyer at level, Dan Lowen, who is excellent and one of the forefront football lawyers. And he said to me, have you ever thought about putting it into a blog format, like a website? And I thought, I've thought about it, but it's quite a lot of effort and I don't really know. He said, you should go for it. So I spent about 2 months putting it all together, designing it, writing it, trying to come up with some future content for it, testing it with lots of lovely friends who gave me feedback. And then massively underestimated the appeal of even that, in that when I then published that I was doing this motorsport lawyer concept, I was so inundated with comments from people that I've not been able to do nearly as much as I wanted to at the time, because I just have to not sleep effectively to get through anything, which has been difficult because I want to do more. And so at the moment I'm thinking about how, I've spoken to other people about this, but how I can leverage all of those lovely messages that I get off people into creating content that teaches people stuff. And some of that might be inviting other people to write things, or interviewing people like this or otherwise, to try and bring that out and give the same stuff out, but without me not unfortunately being able to get my beauty sleep.
So, motorsport is constantly evolving. How do you stay ahead of recent developments you find most impactful? Asking a question with something in my head. So we have forwarded to the about all the what are the they have brought up. The teams have already found the engineers found loopholes to go behind. It's like all of the sort of breaks and all that. So I'm pretty sure they're going to bring more regular to change the whole thing.
Yeah.
But it almost like halfway through the year, because we are in April, almost done. All done. But when the regulation comes, they keep changing and all the so basically do all these in advance. But when sudden things come like that, it affects definitely for the engineers when they're already done with all the money, low car for all that. No, you have to change this. This is the regulation, blah blah blah, like that.
Yeah.
How do you deal with these?
Yeah, it's really hard. It's the quite simple answer. It's really hard. I think staying on top of it is a lot, because it's constantly changing, and it's also, as I mentioned earlier, I think to really have a big picture of what's going on, you need to be seeing what's happening in other parts of motorsport, and that would be equivalent to being a tennis lawyer, but also keeping tabs on what's going on in paddle and table tennis and badminton and every other sport, which is a lot to take in and a lot to consider, because you're not quite as plugged into those other areas. So I'm keeping tabs on what's going on in F2 and F3 and Formula E and everything, because then if somebody says, but this has happened in F1, you can say, oh yeah, that's been copied from World Rally, or oh yes, that has come across from World Endurance Championship. And so it makes sense, or it doesn't make sense, or oh, that's interesting, why have they made that change that wasn't there before? And so that is a lot to keep on top of and to tell people about and to explain. But I think it's getting gradually better because of exactly the fact that people are taking more of an interest in this space. And as that happens, there's also increased requests for things like transparency and decision making and the logic behind those regulatory changes and developments. And so where you see a regulation set that gets released in, December 2024, that has gone through a huge amount of work, of course, by very lovely, very smart people to come up with what it ends up with. And so it wasn't just a thought of a week and then it's churned out. And even though there are many, many versions of the different regulations that come out over the course of the year, most people have already had sight of them and are aware of what's coming. And because you'll see in the press, I mean, there'll be an article, whatever, it might be this week, saying stuff like a regulation about whatever it might be will change and it will come in 3 months' time. So it gives you plenty of time to work to that and think about it and argue about it and get upset about it and lose sleep over it before it's actually something that you have to live by and compete by.
The whole emotion.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Usually all at once.
You have time to think about it. You have time to get angry about it, blame yourself, angry at the other person, and then you calm yourself, some ice cream, and go wake up, and everything's right.
Exactly. Yeah. So I mean, everybody ultimately at the end all has to behave in accordance with whatever it is that comes out, and people can get their heads around it at the end, but there's also something to be said for the process being worked through properly by people when it gets arrived at that end point. And that's obviously a massive topic. And you're never going to be able to please everybody. I mean, it's like anything in life. Like, everybody's going to complain about something that happened. So if there was ever a regulation that got inserted, I think, where everybody agreed, it's probably a very small number. I'd imagine it'd be on topics like sustainability, but even then, it benefits some more than others, always.
I mean, hands down, your job is hard and pun is intended.
Absolutely.
Those who are interested in pursuing a career in motorsports law, what advice do you offer in this particular field?
Yeah, so I mean, to say the same thing, I think, to everybody who reaches out to me. I try my best to reply to every person, which is increasingly difficult, but I always think that it was the people that sort of influenced me making my way through, where I didn't know any lawyers, as I mentioned earlier on, when I was thinking about what I wanted to do. And so I think it helps at least a bit to get some hopefully sensible comments on this. And my overarching advice is always just become the best lawyer that you can possibly be at whatever topic it is that you enjoy the most. And if you are enjoying it and you are high performing in that area, then naturally people gravitate towards what I'm going to put in inverted commas, the cool areas of any given career. I think that's true for anything. I think if you're doing sexy accountancy, then you're probably a very good accountant, because you've probably had the pick of careers to do whatever it is that you want to do. And as I mentioned earlier on, motorsport lawyering is not super magic. It is just a cool name at the top of the same contract that might be a software as a service agreement, to get very boring, between an Amazon and some other company. And if you can do that really well in a smart way, then you can do a motorsport contract you can do the Concord agreement in a smart way. And so it's those people, the people that I come across who are reading about drafting, who care about why it says and or in a clause. Those are the people who rise to the top, and they're the ones that really stand out. They're the ones that are willing to put the effort in. And so I think it's less about being in the industry, more about just being the best at that topic. And then you will see jobs that crop up, roles that crop up, get experience. The other thing to say to people is volunteering. So as a steward, as a marshal, anything that puts you in a motorsport setting that gives you a bit of experience in this space is really, really helpful, I think. And so I think people underestimate the impact that can have, both in network building and also general experience. So if you're lucky enough to have a circuit somewhere close to you, then lucky enough to be in a position where you can do that, then that is obviously hugely helpful.
Before we jump into the rapid fire question, where I'm actually assuming that I'm going to win against you, I have two more questions for you. So, how do you balance the commercial interest of teams and sponsors with the strict regulatory requirements of motorsports governing body? I mean, I'm not talking about international only, but generally, like in the UK, you have a motorsport governing body, motorsports.
Yeah.
With the whole world, all international. So, when the teams and the sponsors, they also have their own set of rules and regulations. And my good God, when I'm talking about it, I'm like thinking about it, my good God, the job that you have. I will lose all my if I'm going to do that job.
Well, I think it's trying to explain to people because I saw this in football, for example, that trying to explain to somebody who's never sponsored a football team what it means to have a box or have your logo in a certain place is quite a lot to get your head around. And they think often, I think when you initially interact with it and you don't really know what you can get, there are lots of questions of, but what inventory is available? What can we even do within the framework of what's possible? Motorsport, of course, has a really complicated safety angle. So there's that to think about, which is how can you deliver rights to commercial partners, do commercial agreements in a way that doesn't impact on safety structures. We've seen, for example, how introduction of the halo, while it's been a good safety feature, I think everybody would say you can see that there are sponsors now on the halo, and that's a good thing for the commercial survival of the sport more generally. And so people will find commercial benefit out of what is actually a regulation. Ultimately, that's a technical regulation that's enforced that brings money into the sport whilst also keeping drivers safe. So it's kind of win-win for everybody, really.
As I said, the question before jumping to the fun question. So looking ahead, what trends or challenges do you foresee in motorsports law? And there's another question we get. How should professionals prepare to address that? It's like we're going through the same bandwagon for asking you the same question in different ways, but yeah.
No, it's sort of future ball. It's like if you've got a crystal ball, and what do you think it's going to look like? I mean, we talked earlier on about AI briefly. I think how are professionals going to improve and get better and be able to deliver services more effectively? I think if you look at what I do and I'm servicing clients, I think things like AI will ultimately change that. I think that will mean that I can do things more strategically. I can think about the harder stuff, where I think the benefit of being an external lawyer versus an internal lawyer is that internally you are firefighting to a large extent, or you're doing HR because you're managing somebody, or you've got other hats on at the same time. Externally, I can be reading the IndyCar regulations and understanding those because I'm using time that I otherwise would have spent doing a management review for a more junior lawyer internally. And so that's a huge advantage. And I think, therefore, how do I think professionals will develop? I think that there'll be a more heavy reliance on people who have those sorts of specialist skills and knowledge base because it helps support your delivery and key stakeholders. And I think things like AI can only possibly supplement that. And what do I think will happen with motorsport law more generally? I mean, there's a huge amount of turmoil in different spaces, which is super interesting. And we see that in NASCAR in the US, we see that happening in the UK as well to a certain extent. I mean, the more global situation impacts on motorsport and what's going to happen in that from a regulatory and legal aspect. While the sport is doing well, people won't want to play around with things, and that's totally fair enough. And I think that makes sense. And I think, honestly, at least at this stage, it will probably only get more complex, at least in the near term. And then there'll be some rowing back from that, probably towards the back end of the 2020s. To a certain extent, we're seeing that with the introduction of the new financial regulations for 2026, which are marginally simplified because it's, of course, just becoming impossible to police. I think I see this a lot when I'm doing contract work, same as regulatory work, but you're often saying to clients, but what is actually practical? Like, what can you actually see? What can you actually do? Is this really useful to you? It's all good and well writing this wonderful new regulation, but if that doesn't do anything, if you can't enforce it, if nobody can actually deal with it, then it doesn't mean anything. It's just not even worth the paper that it's written on. And I think that is the danger of this ever-increasing volume of regulation, that it may just become too difficult for anybody to keep tabs on, and therefore people will do naughty things around the edges where nobody's seeing what's going on. And actually we'd all be better off with a simpler set that everybody just has to adhere to, where, yeah, okay, you might get away with a bit, but at least everybody can get away with it.
Well, the listeners. Okay, so let's to the rapid questions. Usually we ask this question at the end of the podcast, but I don't know for some reason I have started asking this for the beginning of the whole rapid fire questions. So here we go. Do you enjoy pizza?
Yes.
What's your favorite?
I'm partial to a normal sort of pepperoni or equivalent meaty combo.
Are you a yay or a nay person when it comes to pineapple on pizza?
I'm going to probably deeply offend a lot of people who I know, and I'm going to say I don't mind it, which I think counts as a yay.
Yeah, let me ask you because there he is, and then you can say yay, pineapple on pizza.
Yeah.
So if you were a sandwich, what would you be in it? What would be in it, and what would you name it?
Oh, if I was a sandwich, did you say, sorry?
What would be in it? Like, what sort of ingredients will be in that, and what would you name it?
Good question. I think that I like to think that I am a quite chatty, happy, bubbly person. So it'd be something extremely bubbly and bouncy and over the top, and I would have to go with some sort of random play on surname for a pun by way of naming, and go with something like hands-on or equivalent for naming purposes.
So bubbly.
Yeah, well,
Well,
I think I've over-lawyered the sandwich probably there by not coming up with an explicit ingredient, but instead just referencing qualities to it. But I'm actually very easy. I mean, it's not like I don't necessarily have a sort of select list of favourite foods or anything, so I'm pretty relaxed.
So we can just name it the John Lawson.
Yeah, exactly. Well, you could do something like it would be like a Yorkshire pudding, but with like a Yorkshire pudding with gravy inside it would do me lovely.
So who had to argue? Who would it be and
Sorry,
why?
you broke up there at the start. Would you mind?
You had to argue a legal
Yeah.
case for a fictional character.
Oh yeah.
Who would it be and why?
Oh, I'd love to argue with Lionel Hutz from The Simpsons, who is my sort of idol lawyer, in that he is not the best at presenting his client's case, but often comes at it with a lot of force. So I think it would be quite fun to see whatever he managed to come up with in response to some arguments that it could put to him.
There's going to be the most fun that you ever have.
Yeah, exactly. So at least I could enjoy it. That would be good fun. I'd like to think we could be friends.
The first question: if you're imagine yourself, you're in a zombie apocalypse, and you have to throw one of these people to the zombies to escape. I'll give you the options. Who would you pick? Your best friend, your childhood hero, and a random stranger who swears by his life they have a cure.
Oh, that is... I am going to say childhood hero, because I've never met them. So I guess it doesn't really... it only really impacts on me. It doesn't really impact on everybody else. Whereas the other options feel a bit unfair.
It's not going to hurt anyway.
Yeah, exactly. Although I'd feel bad about it. I think nobody wants to end up in a zombie apocalypse. That's no fun for anyone.
The question is a superpower dilemma. You're given a superpower, but there's a twist. You can fly, but only 2 inches off the ground, or you have super strength, but only when lifting bananas. Or you can time travel, but only to last Tuesday.
Oh, it's got to be the 2 inches, surely. I just can't imagine anything else. I mean, with the 2 inches, I guess you could float over water as well. So surely that would mean that, and I think that'd be quite cool. So I'd definitely go for that, I think.
Okay, so this is a question of would you rather. The first one is, would you rather accidentally reply all to a company-wide email with an embarrassing personal secret, or bug dial your boss while you're ranting about them?
Good question. I think the boss is more savable. I think I can probably row back from that quite. I could justify that. I'd rather be honest with them anyway. So if anything, it just forces me to be honest with them, which I think is a nice thing. So I think you end up in a good place there, to be honest.
Would you rather be able to read minds, but only when people are thinking bad things about you, or be able to turn invisible, but only when completely naked?
I guess you don't have to use the invisibility, do you? So I suppose the invisibility is probably better. Otherwise, I think the anxiety from the first one would just be crippling.
Okay, this is actually a food betrayal for you. Would you rather have every single meal for the rest of your life be slightly too spicy, or never be able to eat your favorite food again?
Oh, I would just do never, I think, rather than slightly too spicy. I'd just be alright with that. That would be totally fine. Although I'd be sad, I'd probably be a little bit sad, but my wife jokes with me that I don't mind eating completely unseasoned, very boring stuff, and so I'm sure she would have no shock that I would pick the latter option there.
Well, John, that's the end of me giving you hard times, but you will actually give me very easy answers where I was actually expecting you to be having some trouble, but it was not.
It's all good fun. No, it's all good fun. No, thanks a lot. I really appreciate it. It's always nice to chat about all the good stuff that people are doing, I think, in the background as well, where a lot of people just see the glamour and front side rather than what's going on with everybody who's putting a massive shift in the factories or offices or whatever in every sport, not just motorsport.
So, if anybody wants to follow you on your social media and what you're up to and all that, do tell them where can you find you?
Yeah, wicked. So, as I said earlier, I think if you're either generally interested in motorsport law, or you are looking at a career, or you just generally want to reach out, then please do. And you can find me on LinkedIn. I try and respond to everybody. Otherwise, and linked to on there, I am on I think Instagram and have a website called The Motorsport Lawyer. Again, you can email me through that as well. I'm also on X, but given everything that's been going on, I am no longer paying much attention to that platform. So please message me elsewhere, effectively, if you're going to be looking at that. But follow me on any of those, much appreciated, and feedback is always welcome.
Well, John, this has been one hell of a ride, from breaking down the legal drama behind motorsports to answering the most absurd rapid questions we come up with. You've given us an episode to remember. Your insight into the behind-the-scenes world of racing contracts, team disputes, and regulatory madness were absolutely fascinating. And I think we all have a newfound respect for just how much law influences what happens on track. To be honest, listening to all that, it made me mental, because, oh my good God, the whole reading stuff they have to go through just to come up with a solution, that's absolutely mental, and it's not an easy job. So high respect for you, sir, there. To our listeners, if you enjoyed this episode, share it, tag it, let us know what's the craziest motorsport legal battle you can remember, of course. And John, thank you so much for joining us again on this episode. I hope that you have a wonderful time, and hopefully we will be seeing you sooner inside another team, but hopefully we won't be seeing you in front of the TV, because I was thinking, okay, he's coming in front of the not ever going to be
Exactly. I think if nobody knows I exist more generally, then that's probably a good thing overall for everyone. So if I can just keep chipping away and solving problems for people in the background and everything ticking over, then I think we're all good.
Well, folks, until next time, read the fine print, follow track limit, or don't. He can effortlessly cover you back and keep your engines reviving. This has been Stripping the Dipping, and next week we have another amazing guest. So stay tuned. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot.